The cold wind howled through the streets as Daniel pulled his thin jacket tighter around himself. The city was alive with neon lights and rushing footsteps, but for Daniel, it was just another evening of struggling to survive. With no home to return to, he wandered through the empty sidewalks, hoping to find a warm place to rest. Have you ever wondered how one small act of honesty could change someone's life forever? What if a simple decision to do what's right led to a future beyond imagination? This is the story of a man who had nothing but kindness in his heart, and how fate rewarded him in the most unexpected way. Daniel had been homeless for nearly 2 years. Once, he had a steady job, a small apartment, and dreams of building a better life. But life had its way of testing him. After losing his job due to company downsizing, he struggled to find another one. The bills piled up, and soon, he lost everything. With no family to turn to, the streets became his only shelter. Despite his hardships, Daniel never let go of his morals. He believed in honesty, in doing the right thing, even when no one was watching. And one cold evening, fate put him to the test. As he walked past a small alley near a bustling shopping district, something caught his eye. A black leather wallet lying on the ground. Curious, he picked it up. It was heavy, stuffed with cash, credit cards, and an ID belonging to someone named Richard Lawson. For a moment, Daniel's stomach twisted. He hadn't eaten a proper meal in days. The money inside that wallet could buy him warm food, maybe even a place to sleep for the night. But as tempting as it was, he knew what he had to do. With a deep breath, he made his decision. A choice that would set into motion a series of events he never could have imagined. Daniel's hands trembled slightly as he gripped the wallet. His stomach growled, reminding him of the hunger gnawing at his insides. He could barely remember the last time he had a proper meal. The thought of using just a little of the money crossed his mind, but he quickly shook it away. "This isn't mine," he muttered to himself. He flipped through the wallet, scanning the ID. Richard Lawson. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but Daniel couldn't place it. There was also a business card inside, a company name, an address, and a phone number. The crisp, professional design hinted that this man was someone important. Looking around, Daniel sighed. It was late, and most businesses were closed. He decided he would return the wallet first thing in the morning. For now, he needed to find a safe place to rest. As he walked back toward the shelter where he sometimes stayed, memories flooded his mind. He hadn't always lived like this. Just 2 years ago, he had been working at a construction company, earning a modest but steady income. He had a small apartment, a second-hand car, and dreams of eventually going back to school. But when the company shut down unexpectedly, everything unraveled. The job market was tough, and without a degree or specialized skills, finding stable work was nearly impossible. His savings dwindled quickly. At first, he tried taking on odd jobs, washing dishes, cleaning stores, even carrying heavy loads at the docks. But nothing lasted. One bad month led to another, and soon, he found himself evicted with nowhere to go. Even at his lowest, Daniel refused to steal or deceive. "I may be poor," he often reminded himself, "but I'm not a thief." The next morning, Daniel arrived at the address on the business card. It was an enormous glass building in the heart of the city, standing tall among the other skyscrapers. He hesitated at the entrance, suddenly feeling self-conscious about his worn-out clothes and unshaven face. Security guards stood by the door, eyeing him suspiciously. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward. I need to return this," he said, holding up the wallet. "It belongs to Richard Lawson." One of the guards frowned. "Where did you get that?" "I found it on the street last night. I just want to give it back." The guard exchanged a look with his colleague before nodding. "Wait here." Daniel stood nervously, feeling out of place among the well-dressed employees walking past. A few minutes later, the guard returned with a man in a sharp gray suit. He looked to be in his late 50s, with silver-streaked hair and a powerful presence. "You found my wallet?" the man asked, his voice calm but curious. Daniel nodded and handed it over. "Yes, sir. I found it near the shopping district last night. Everything is still inside." Richard Lawson opened the wallet, checking its contents. After a moment, he looked up, studying Daniel carefully. "Thank you," he said. "Not many would have done what you did." Daniel shrugged. It was the right thing to do. Richard's lips curled into a small smile. "What's your name?" "Daniel. Daniel Carter." "Well, Daniel Carter," Richard said, slipping the wallet into his pocket. "I'd like to talk to you. Do you have a few minutes?" Daniel hesitated. Why would a wealthy man like Richard Lawson want to talk to him? But something about his tone suggested sincerity. Sure, he replied. Good, Richard said, motioning toward the building. Come inside. Daniel followed, unaware that this conversation was about to change his life forever. Daniel followed Richard through the grand lobby of the skyscraper. The marble floors gleamed under the bright lights, and the air smelled of expensive cologne and fresh coffee. Employees in tailored suits moved with purpose, barely sparing him a glance. Daniel felt painfully out of place in his faded jeans and worn-out jacket. Richard led him into a private office on the top floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline, and a massive wooden desk stood at the center of the room. The space radiated power and success. Sit. Richard gestured toward a leather chair. Daniel hesitated before lowering himself into it. Richard leaned against his desk, arms crossed. Tell me, Daniel, why didn't you keep the money? Daniel blinked, surprised by the question. Because it wasn't mine, he said simply. Richard studied him. You hesitated outside the building. You almost didn't come in. Daniel sighed. People don't usually trust guys like me. I wasn't sure anyone would believe me if I said I just wanted to return it. Richard's eyes darkened slightly. You've been through a lot, haven't you? Daniel hesitated, then nodded. Lost my job. Lost my home. Been trying to get back on my feet, but it's not easy. Richard was silent for a moment. Then he reached into his desk and pulled out a checkbook. How much do you need? Daniel's eyes widened. I don't want money. Richard raised an eyebrow. Most people would have jumped at the offer. I appreciate it, but I didn't return your wallet for a reward, Daniel said firmly. I just need a chance. A job. Something I can work for. A slow smile spread across Richard's face. Honest and hardworking. That's rare. He picked up his phone and made a call. Send Mr. Carter to the HR department. Have them find a place for him. Daniel's heart pounded. You're giving me a job? Richard nodded. Let's start with an entry-level position. You prove yourself, and we'll talk about more. Daniel could barely believe it. After months of struggling, he finally had a chance. A woman from HR arrived and handed him some paperwork. Follow me, Mr. Carter. Let's get you started. As he walked out of the office, Daniel glanced back. Richard Lawson stood by the window, watching him with an unreadable expression. What Daniel didn't know was that this was only the beginning. Daniel could hardly believe what had just happened. A few hours ago, he was just another homeless man trying to survive. Now, he had a real job, an opportunity to turn his life around. The HR woman, Linda, led him through a maze of hallways before stopping at a small but professional-looking office space. This is where you'll start, she said, handing him a folder. You'll be working as an administrative assistant for now. Mostly paperwork, organizing files, and assisting senior staff. Your supervisor will brief you. Daniel nodded eagerly. Thank you. I won't let you down. Linda gave him a small smile. Mr. Lawson sees something in you. Don't waste this chance. For the first few days, Daniel worked harder than he ever had before. He arrived early, stayed late, and made sure to learn every detail of his tasks. He wasn't just grateful, he was determined to prove himself. But not everyone welcomed him. Can you believe this guy? Whispered one of the employees, a young man in a sharp suit. Homeless one day, working here the next? Must be a charity case. Daniel pretended not to hear, but the words stung. Others ignored him completely, treating him like he didn't belong. One afternoon, while organizing files, Daniel heard a voice behind him. You're doing well. He turned to see Richard standing in the doorway. Thank you, sir, Daniel said. I just want to do my best. Richard stepped closer, his expression unreadable. You remind me of myself, years ago. Daniel frowned. You were homeless? Richard chuckled. Not exactly, but I wasn't born rich. I built everything from nothing. Daniel's respect for him grew. He had assumed Richard was just another privileged businessman, but maybe there was more to his story. Richard continued. People will doubt you. They'll question why you're here, but let your work answer them. Daniel nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. I will. Over the next few weeks, he pushed himself harder. Slowly, people started noticing. His attention to detail, his dedication, he was proving himself. Then, one day, everything changed. Daniel was helping his supervisor, Mark, prepare a financial report when he noticed an inconsistency in the numbers. Something didn't add up. Mark, these figures don't match, Daniel pointed out. Mark's face paled. It's fine. Just submit it. Daniel hesitated. The difference wasn't small, it was a six-figure discrepancy. Shouldn't we double-check? Mark's expression hardened. Drop it, Daniel. Something wasn't right. That night, Daniel stayed late, reviewing the files. The more he dug, the clearer it became. Someone was embezzling money. And if he spoke up, he could lose everything. Daniel sat at his desk long after everyone else had left. The numbers didn't lie. Someone was stealing from the company. But what could he do? He had just started this job. If he accused the wrong person, he could lose everything before he even had a chance to rebuild his life. His mind raced. Should he report it? Ignore it? The fear of being seen as a troublemaker gnawed at him. The next morning, he made a decision. Instead of going directly to Richard, Daniel gathered more evidence. He reviewed old files, cross-checked transactions, and soon, a pattern emerged. The missing money was being funneled into a private account, and Mark, his supervisor, was the one behind it. But confronting Mark was risky. One afternoon, when the office was nearly empty, Daniel approached him. "Mark, I need to talk to you." Mark barely looked up. "Make it quick." Daniel took a deep breath. "I know about the missing money." Mark froze. His eyes darkened as he leaned back in his chair. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I do," Daniel said firmly. "And if I found it, someone else might too. You need to come clean before it's too late." For a moment, Mark said nothing. Then, his lips curled into a smirk. "You think anyone will believe you? A homeless guy they picked up off the street." Daniel's stomach tightened. He had feared this. Mark stood, his voice low and threatening. "You're nobody, Daniel. If you report this, I'll make sure you regret it." Daniel clenched his fists. He could walk away, pretend he never saw anything. But then what? He had been given a second chance. Was he really going to waste it by letting fear control him? That evening, he made his choice. He walked straight into Richard Lawson's office. "Sir, I found something you need to see." Richard studied the documents Daniel laid in front of him. His expression darkened with every page. "You're sure about this?" Daniel nodded. "Yes. I didn't want to believe it either, but the numbers don't lie." Richard exhaled sharply. "I'll handle it." The next morning, Mark was called into a meeting. By noon, he was escorted out of the building by security. Word spread quickly. He had been caught. Daniel braced himself for backlash, but instead, something unexpected happened. Colleagues who had ignored him now nodded in approval. Linda, the HR manager, even stopped by his desk. "That was brave of you," she said. "Not many people would have done what you did." For the first time in a long time, Daniel felt like he belonged. A week later, Richard called him back into his office. "You could have ignored it," he said. "But you didn't. That takes integrity." Daniel shifted in his seat. "I just wanted to do the right thing." Richard studied him for a moment, then smiled. "I want you to train for a higher position. You've proven yourself, Daniel. It's time for the next step." Daniel's breath caught. A higher position? More responsibility? A future? For the first time in years, he saw a real path ahead of him. A few months passed, and Daniel had completely transformed his life. No longer the nervous new hire, he had grown into a confident and respected member of the company. Under Richard's mentorship, he learned more than just business skills. He learned leadership, decision-making, and most importantly, self-worth. One evening, as he left the office, he stopped by a cafe to grab a coffee. As he stepped out, he noticed a man sitting on the sidewalk, shivering under a thin blanket. His clothes were ragged, his face sunken with exhaustion. Daniel hesitated. The sight reminded him too much of his own past. He reached into his wallet, pulling out a few bills, but then he stopped. Money was temporary. What this man needed was an opportunity, just like the one Richard had given him. He knelt down. "Hey, do you have a place to stay tonight?" The man looked up, wary. "No, but I'll be fine." Daniel smiled. "How about a meal first?" "My treat." For the first time in years, Daniel saw himself reflected in another person, lost, struggling, but not beyond hope. As they ate, Daniel listened to the man's story. It was painfully familiar. Bad luck, a few mistakes, and the world turning its back on him. "You ever worked in an office before?" Daniel asked. The man shook his head. Daniel slid his business card across the table. "Come by tomorrow. I can't promise anything, but I'll introduce you to someone who might be able to help." The man's eyes widened in disbelief. "Why are you doing this?" Daniel smiled. "Because someone once did the same for me." It was in that moment that he truly understood. His journey wasn't just about survival. It was about giving others the same second chance he had received. Daniel's story was proof that doing the right thing, even when it's hard, can lead to unexpected rewards. He had returned a wallet without expecting anything, yet that one act of honesty changed his entire life. Success wasn't about wealth or status. It was about integrity, kindness, and lifting others up when they needed it the most. How many times have we walked past someone in need, thinking their situation is beyond our help? But sometimes, all it takes is a small act of kindness, a helping hand, a listening ear, to change someone's future. So, ask yourself, if you had the chance to change someone's life, would you take it? Because you never know, one day, the life you change might just be your own.